Hey, it's Joe West from West Barn. Mike Shimshack is absent this morning. He's taking a personal day. But we run these podcasts so closely to the time that they air to keep them sort of relevant to what's happening in time and space. So we are without Mike, sadly. Today we have Gregg Vizza on. Gregg Vizza is an acoustic designer. He was a studio owner at one point. He does all kinds of design, from live venue to mobile truck to recording studio. I had the great fortune of studying under Gregg Vizza in my early years. He gave me my first opportunity at a recording studio in Pittsburgh that he owned and designed and ran for many, many years. It was sort of the largest large format studio in Pittsburgh, a beautiful room that he designed. And I got to learn there. One of the things we like to talk about is all this stuff about audio, but what we have not really mentioned, and I think is critical to anyone becoming a great engineer, is you need to have a worldview. You have to have a perception of how the world is in regards to audio, how you deal with low end, what drums do, and sort of what the rules of your universe are. YouTube is a great learning source, but you can't get a worldview. I was lucky enough as a kid, an 18-year-old kid, to stumble across Gregg Vizza, and he gave me a shot at being an assistant at this studio, and believed in me when no one else did, and really filled my head with everything. How I see audio is all because of this guy. So I want to thank you for that, Gregg Vizza. Welcome to the show.
Welcome, Joe.
And Gregg Vizza was one of, I think, 3 people that I thanked at the Grammys. When I was a young kid, I always would tell him whenever I was working at the studio in Pittsburgh, if I ever won a Grammy, I would thank him. And 30 years later, I was on the stage in Los Angeles and thanked my mom, my wife, my son, and Gregg Vizza. It was a pleasure to do that. So thank you, buddy.
That was awesome. I kept the video.
Yeah, it's that's a real thing. People talk about YouTube. First of all, today what we're going to be talking about is studio design. When we talk to all these mix engineers and they talk about their bass traps and their diffusers and what their control room is set up like in regards to sound absorption and treatment, I think it's a really powerful thing. And I talked to Gregg and I said, man, would you be willing to come on and talk with us about what anybody can do to make a small bedroom or an extra room or whatever you've got, how you can make it usable for people that just put some speakers up and a laptop or a full-blown studio, how we can treat that room quickly and easily to make it a usable mix room. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get started on that, I want to tell you, it's just so important. I can remember sitting in the control room with Gregg Vizza, and actually, he might not remember this, but I asked him, this is how inept I was as an engineer. I asked him, well, why don't we just take the kick drum and mult it out to another channel and pan it left and right, and then we'll have a stereo kick drum. That's the level of understanding I had. And Gregg quickly told me why that's not going to work. And I studied under Gregg for probably 6 to 8 months, hardcore as a second engineer. And then he just threw me right into the middle of the deep end of the pool. And there was plenty of failures, but he stuck with me all the way through having a Yamaha C7 on big sort of casters leave my hands and crash right into the center of 2 massive plates of 5/8 inch, studio glass. He didn't fire me for that. He didn't fire me for being incompetent on many sessions, but he stuck with me, and I'm thankful that he did that. It's an incredible experience. I would encourage all of you to find someone to follow so you can understand the world of audio. Find somebody that you respect and trust so you can start to understand and see what the rules of audio are. You're not going to get that from YouTube. You get a lot of great information, but if you can follow somebody who really is a master at it for a while, you could start to see what the rules of the universe are, and then you'll build your own universe from that. It's a very important part. All right, so let me. I'm going to share my screen here. I want to show you some of the rooms Gregg Vizza has done. His little PDF here. Gregg has done a ton of stuff in the studio world. You can see here's a control room design here. Here's one of the control rooms. You can see the stair-step ceiling going up here, pushing things into the diffusers. I guess this would be a live and dead end room.
Yeah, notice also the sidewalls. It looks flat just due to photography, but those are stair-stepped as well, pushing everything to the diffusers in the rear.
The live room, you can see the clouds up in the ceilings. We'll talk about that and what radiuses will do in regards to diffusion. Pretty room. I love those big elliptical control rooms. This is Gregg Vizza's room right here. This is the piano that I put through the corner of a glass. It's actually over on this side of the room, but I put it right through the corner of the glass and shattered it. You can see on his room here, he also has a bunch of
took a big chunk out of the piano.
Sorry about that. He's got these adjustable absorption on the wall where he could close them and have hard surfaces, or open them and have the absorbed surfaces. This is the control room from that room. It was called Audiomation in Pittsburgh. You can see it's a bunch of analog machines over here. This is a 24 track. We had an MX80, which was the 16 track 1-inch. And a bunch, there's the MX80 over here. An 8 track 1/2-inch Atari. They were all Atari machines. You see the console there was a...
There's your glass that you broke.
Oh, yeah, I broke this. Whoops. Well, broke this glass over here, right on the corner.
Yeah, right on the corner.
I can remember going up to your office and just like, I was just thinking I was fired. So this was this who made this car? This is an Atari console, right? Who made the console?
Well, it's a long story. The people from API formed a new company called Sound Workshop.
Right. Sound Workshop.
And then we bought one of the Sound Workshops, which was in Studio B.
Series 34C.
Yeah. And then Sound Workshop got bought out by Atari.
Got it.
And this was the Sound Workshop with Atari money invested in
This was the Series 54.
Yeah, which made it actually a better console due to Atari's influx of cash to Sound Workshop. But it's still a Sound Workshop.
Gotcha. Some other rooms he's designed here. See those clouds up in the ceiling? What a great looking drum kit. It's a statement. Look at all the holes they have for all the ports they have for miking. Something that looks more reminiscent of what's happening in the modern world here. You can see those ceilings. The idea behind these ceilings is audio hits them and then goes back into the diffuser.
Same with the sidewalls again. Don't dismiss that the sidewalls are doing exactly what the ceiling is doing.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a great shot. Where's this at? Like an art institute or something?
It is a sort of a kids training situation, but it's not an art institute. It's I forget what it's called.
I tell you what they really need is to invest in speakers that are more than 3 inches as their near field monitors.
I don't know why they wanted those. Those are JBL. Would you use JBL Studio?
I would. I think I used to have a little set. This was a room that Gregg Vizza, I was mixing out of this room in New York City. It was called Gallery. Clay Chef owned it, a really good friend of mine. In a beautiful room in Gallery, and we did a ton of hit records out of this room when I was working for the Berman Brothers. And I asked Gregg to come in and redesign it because it sounded horrible at the moment. And you could see this is all these stepped reflective surfaces everywhere, right? Ceiling and sides, and all that audio from the big far fields, which were Quest heads, to whatever we had up here, usually Genelec 1031s and NS10s. They'd bounce off of these and go back to the back of the room, which was a diffuser. We'll explain all that. Another great room. I love these elliptical glass control room. I mean, you just get a great view from the.
You get the panoramic feeling, yeah.
Now you're doing a bunch of these for what are like prosumer rooms. You know, they're like, oh, they've got kind of consumer gear in them, but they're professional recordings. Here's one of the trucks. He did trucks for the Olympics in China, I believe, and this was for the Super Bowl.
Yep.
So he would design these trucks. Would you design them from a technology standpoint or acoustic standpoint, or both? Like you were doing all the technical routing of fiber and all that?
I even designed the consoles. If you go back, see how they sort of look like outer space.
You're talking about these?
Yeah, I even designed those in CAD. Yeah.
I got you. So you did all the design.
And then we had a CNC water jet cut the aluminum to my CAD.
Wow. So, Gregg, this goes to show Gregg's proficiency and, level of what he's doing it at. He's a spectacular. I can remember working for Gregg, and he instilled in me, my father instilled in me, because we were in Pittsburgh, a poor area, that you never turn down a gig. If you ever sit on the couch when you turn down a gig, well, then you'll know the regret that you feel. And Gregg would take on jobs at the studio in Pittsburgh that we had no business doing, like phone interviews for WABC in New York, where we were dropping phone calls. We had a little modem that we had our tech make to take a phone line in and broadcast it. And I remember I hung up on the governor of New York like 3 or 4 times, or we did satellite transfers out of that place. We recorded the symphony when we didn't really have the space to really do a full symphony. We'd have to double them, and the logistics of all that. Gregg was fearless in what he was taking on at that studio from a technology standpoint. And it taught me one thing. It taught me as an engineer, say yes, always say yes. Then learn what you need to learn, do your preparation, and then execute it. If you fail, okay, learn from it, do it better next time. But you find that by sorting out those numbers, you probably only fail at like the 0.001%, so you're able to grow, you're able to get the money and keep busy as a business or as an independent engineer. So do things, stretch yourself, push yourself, and try to get to a point where you're always uncomfortable, and then you become comfortable recording symphonies. I went on to record a 55-piece symphony here at Ocean Way in Nashville. I would have never felt comfortable doing that had I not worked in Pittsburgh under Gregg, really pushing the envelope with that. So today we want to talk about your home studio. Let's say you've got a basement. You got a spare room. Maybe you're going to build a garage out, or maybe you're going to go into a spare bedroom. We want to help you get that room listenable so that you can do work in that room for the best that room can be. You should be able to make music in just about any room. What are like the minimum room requirements size-wise to really be able to start to think about that? You can't do it in a closet, but what dimensions? Would it be 15 by 18, 12 by 15? What's our room minimums?
I wouldn't say there's a minimum, but the way it works, the smaller the room, the higher the frequency of the room resonances. Just think of a drum. When you have a closed, tuned chamber, the bigger it is, the lower the frequency, the smaller it is, the higher the frequency. And a drum is a resonant chamber, and your room is a resonant chamber. So
let's say
if you want to have room resonances that are in the 300 to 500 hertz range, which would be almost impossible to do any kind of quality work, then you have a very small room. If you want to lower those frequencies, you have a big room. If you get the room big enough, the resonant frequencies drop below 20 hertz and you don't even have to think about them.
And the reason why resonance frequencies are important is, like, for instance, if you've ever been in a shower and you sang, you'll hear like a honishness of where that room is resonating, right?
That one would resonate at a very high frequency because it's such a small shower. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But when you're playing through your monitors in this room that you've decided that you're going to be mixing in, if the room is ringing at that, you'll be always saying, you know what? Let's say your room's ringing at 400 hertz.
You're going to be
saying,
it.
Oh, that vocal has too much 400 hertz because the room is producing it after the speakers. So at that point, guess what happens? It's not that your end mix has too much 400 hertz. Your end mix has not enough 400 hertz because you heard it in the room that was rich with 400 hertz and you EQ'd it out.
Yeah,
that's what you want to avoid.
Your mix is always going to be the inverse of what you're hearing. Yes. That's why, people that love to hear bass, I got this subwoofer and I turn it up and it sounds so great. Now your mixes go out all thin.
Well, and there was that era when everybody was mixing records on those JBL speakers in the 70s that were very bright. But when you listen to those records, they're so beautiful and dark in a good way when they came out, right? But you would think, oh, they must have had a really dull speaker in this. No, they had a very bright speaker in the studio, so they did not accentuate that.
Right.
So what we're trying to figure out here is like, okay, what do you do? I have a little bit of a pet peeve. You look on television. In the old days, you would watch Hee Haw. And Hee Haw would have this segment where they'd be it seemed like a recording studio. They have egg crates. Remember this? Did you watch Hee Haw?
I just remember
there were egg crates
in studio. That started in the 60s with radio stations. Yeah.
So, but here's people's gut reaction. All right, I got my bedroom. I'm going to put a bunch of egg crate or a bunch of absorption up, and I'm going to sonically treat my room. And the reality is, well, that's as bad of a decision as not doing any treatment. In my mind, it's always been a pet peeve. Like, I'm going to soundproof my room, and it's like, well, you're not looking to soundproof it. You're looking to make your room sound good.
Here's the reason again. Inverse. if you make an anechoic chamber for your mix room that's totally absorptive, what are you going to do with your mix? You're going to add all kind of ambiance to your mix,
all kinds of hype to make it sound alive because your room is dead.
and then when people get it, it's going to be just a slushy mess,
right?
Because you added all this extra ambiance and reverb, and because you're trying to compensate for this empty suck in your room that's sucking all the energy out.
So the moral of the story here is go set up there's a couple things you need to do. You find a room that you're going to be using. And there are some rules, just the raw room. Let's talk a drywalled room with, let's say, carpeting on the floor or hardwoods. But if you're in a room, ideally it's not symmetrical, 12 foot by 12 foot. Ideally, you have a room that is 12 foot by 16 foot or 12 foot by 18 foot, or, you're trying to find a room that looks more like a rectangle than a perfect square, right?
I could explain that.
Please do.
You have three room modes, three axial room modes they're called, with axial meaning axis. So X, Y, and Z. So your X would be left to right across the room. Y would be front to back, and Z is floor to ceiling. Each one of those is a room mode. If you're in a cube where length, width, and height are all equal, now you've just multiplied that mode 3 times. It's going to be so hideous that a cube would be the worst. If you have a room that's a cube and you want to record or have a control room in there, don't. There's no way to fix it. But if you have a rectangular room, what happens is the resonant frequency of the length is different than the resonant frequency of the width. And if the height is different and you got all 3 different, they mix and sort of smooth out those resonances. So if you got a peak at one frequency and then you got a null at that same frequency from the other axis, it could smooth out those resonances. Now, there are formulas and even computer programs that'll actually, if you can design a room from scratch and it doesn't already exist, you can define those length, width, and heights and look at a graph.
Right, if you're building a room.
And actually smooth all those room resonances out just by getting the proper room ratios. But not too many people get to build it from scratch. So if you're in a room and it's rectangular, probably just some of the simplest things you can do. If you were right in the middle of the room, figure that you're 180 degrees out of phase from the left wall to the right wall if you're directly in the middle. So you're going to have a giant null there. And depending on how bad your room ratios are, I've seen nulls of 30 dB at the very center. So no matter how much subwoofer you have, and no matter how high you turn the volume on the sub, you've got minus 30 dB of bass at the very center of the room.
So this is what people aren't understanding real quick. Your room will sound different wherever you stand.
Wherever you move. Yes,
so
sir.
We're talking about where you're going to put your listening environment in whatever room you choose, right?
Yes.
So center is never the best place in any room, right?
No, not for bass.
And we're not talking about any treatment happening. There's no diffusers, there's no bass traps, there's no absorption in this room yet. So we're just saying raw room, never center.
And remember, the smaller the room, the higher that frequency. So that null that you would have in the center could be at 300, 400 hertz.
Right.
The room is bigger, it might be at 100 or 80.
And these are all frequencies, everybody, if you're not familiar with them. 300 hertz is it's the lion's share of where you hear lower mid-range. It's like the human ear it hears from 20 hertz to 20,000, but it really focuses in on that 1K to 100 hertz. That's a greater proportion of that. So we're talking about a big piece of real estate of where humans hear disproportionately to the full spectrum of what they can hear. So it's important frequency.
So now bass is a null at the center. At the wall, it's double. So check it out. So, well, let me put it this way. It's not double. the amount of null in the middle is equal to the amount of boost at the wall. So if you go halfway between the center and the wall, where are you? If you're at plus 10 at the wall and minus 10 in the middle,
right? You're closer to zero at 25%.
If you go halfway between the wall in the middle of the room, which would be a quarter of the distance, you've just taken the minus 10 and the plus 10 and made zero.
All right, so let's say this. We're looking at our screen right now.
But that's front to rear. That's front to rear.
Okay.
Left to right, you can't be off center or you lost your stereo imaging.
Okay, true. Okay, so let's have everybody look at the screen right now, and we're going to look at the dimensions of our screen as, like, say this is our room. You know, we're looking at a room that's shaped like the aspect ratio of our screen here. The center where my nose is a horrible place to set up your setup. However, if you were here, you're doing much better, right? Yeah. If you're listening from this wall, these are your speakers. There's right? Your speakers. So you have a potential good listening spot here. You have a potential good listening spot down here if you're listening from this wall, right?
If you put your speakers down there, yeah.
Speakers this way, in listening spot here, listening this way. You also should have a good listening spot over here with the speakers coming off of this side in 25% of the way into the room. You listening here. You know, so symmetrically, these will work. 25% into the room, any direction. From here, listening from this way. From here, listening from this way. From here, listening this way. And from here. So that, before you even touch a piece of Owens Corning 703 or bass trap or put down rugs, this is a huge advantage you have from, you know, hey, I'm just going to set up my speakers so that they're in the corners of the room. They're blowing out here, and I'm going to sit here listening. That's a horrible decision. Let's start with what the room will give you, right? So ideally, you've got 4 solutions all ready to get you in the ballpark. And if you look at every studio, you'll notice studios in New York City that weren't set up like stork rooms, right? That were kind of using existing spaces. You notice people gravitate towards those locations in the room anyhow. Just over time, they realize that's where they sound the best. But so great. So that kind of just naked room, that's our solutions for, like, hey, where are we going to start working here? Right? That should be the first decision. Right? And ideally, your room has equal congruent sides. Like, you wouldn't want to put your listening environment up here if you had a carpeted wall on this side and you had a brick wall on that side. You don't want different reflective surfaces. Ideally, the room is all consistent in regards to its timbre, what it's going to be throwing back at you. Correct, Greg?
If you want proper stereo imaging.
Right.
The left to right would be where you'd want that. Front to rear, not as important.
Not as important. Okay. Very good. Okay, so now we've now taken this extra room in our house or in our basement. Let's say, preferably, you have a situation where you've got this unfinished basement. You can kind of build a space, right? But
that would be the best, because if you get a bigger space,
you could start to make some really good decisions then. But if it's just cast upon you, you've got a rental place and you're using your third bedroom or second bedroom as a studio, think this way. Try to find places that have similar reflective surfaces to the left and right. Put yourself 25% into the room from the angle that sounds the best. Don't be in the center, right? And at this point, we need to discuss, okay, what about, where do we put our monitors? If we're talking about wall coupling, you know, if you put a speaker up against the wall, it's going to have, let's say, twice as much bass. If you put it out of a corner, it's going to have 3 times as much bass. What do we need to know about where our monitors sit in?
Yeah, I wouldn't put them in the corners. Even when you're in a small room, you might have to put them close to the wall. I don't know that that's a big deal. I wouldn't get them in a corner though. But up against the front wall, I haven't seen that.
What's optimal?
Front wall or more, you know.
Say it one more time. You glitched up there. How far?
About a foot off the front wall, you know.
So what we're saying is,
back of the speaker.
Yeah.
But it's not as critical as you think. That front wall should not be in the acoustic picture. your sidewalls and ceiling are going to be in the acoustic.
What you don't want to do in our little example here, like if this is our room, you don't want to have your desk set up over here and one speaker coming out of this corner and one just coming flat off the wall. You'd want to move this guy down to the middle.
You need stereo imaging. So when we say not to be in the middle of the room, that's front to rear. Left to right, you have to be in the middle. So that's why we don't leave the sidewalls parallel.
Try to find a room that you could be in the middle, left to right of that room.
If you could just buy a piece of plywood or MDF or drywall and angle those sides, because you're going to be in the middle and you don't want that to be parallel.
Right.
If you could angle them toward the diffusers in the rear.
Okay, so let's say you decide to put your control room here, your desk here. Your speakers, ideally, I find, and you tell me how wrong I am here, I find if I'm 2 foot away from a wall, I don't really have issues with that wall.
There you go.
In regards to wall coupling. So if you can have the back of your speakers at least 2 feet away from the wall.
I said a foot, you say 2 feet, but I agree with you.
It's always good too, because you inevitably you got to walk behind those speakers for something.
True to wire thing,
right? Because you don't want to be doing that thing, especially after Thanksgiving, where you're like doing this behind the wall.
You are right.
Okay, so minimum. Let's say if best case scenario in this room, you put yourself 2 feet away from the wall. You put those speakers facing you. These we're talking about, and keep in mind, there's 3 types of speakers. There's near field monitors, which are near field. Those are the speakers everybody has. There's midfield monitors, which usually sit on stands behind the speakers, and are usually 10 to 12-inch speakers. And then you have far field monitors that are way up in the ceiling if you're at a big, massive studio. And as you go from your near fields to midfields to far fields, your room becomes more and more involved in the sonics of what you're listening to, because as you zoom out, you're incorporating more reflections from the room. So most of us are going to be dealing with near field monitors. If we keep those 2 feet away from the wall in the middle, left to right, with hopefully similar surfaces on each side, we have drywall on each side, okay? And ideally, we'll get into some treatment, but in a raw room, that would be the best case scenario, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, and then it's like, okay, at this point, we're going to start to dip into, we've done everything we can in the physical, just putting our gear in a room. Now we're saying, what can I do to make my room treatment better? How do I deal with treating this room? The first thing I always do is listen to the room in its native state, and then have some opinions. Let's take some mixes to your car and say, oh, there's this problem with the low end, or it's too bright, or there's this issue with the mud, or there's this resonant tone, right? You need to make some decisions based off of your ears, because we all don't have TEF or whatever they're using now, time, energy, frequency, or whatever the software is.
I would preempt that before you even listen. You can't have a reflective back wall.
Okay, good.
Yeah, because then everything is coming back to you from behind you, full force, and it's full clarity.
Okay, so without listening, you could say, I'm going to either diffuse my back wall or absorb my back wall, right?
Diffuse would be the best, because if you absorb it, then you're going to want to add more ambiance to your mixes. But if diffusion's too expensive, absorption would be better. But you can make your own diffusers. Just bend some wood.
Okay, real quick here.
Glue on wood and bend it. 1/4-inch thick glue on and bend it.
Tell people the difference between, and real quick before we go on to this, did we miss anything in regards to just using a raw space and setting yourself up for the best success? Have we missed anything in regards to gear placement and walls and directions? Is there anything else?
I would think we're 25% through what would improve a room, but you got 75% to talk about. Yeah.
Did we miss anything in regards to what they can do without touching any treatment? I think we covered all the.
All right. By placing yourself where you showed on your video frame there, you've improved the room. But
there's nothing else we can do in that without touching a piece of.
That would be without doing anything, just by putting your speakers.
So let's say if we're going to divide this into sections, you've got choose the best spot in the room. Use the room.
There we go.
Intelligently. Second is now going to be room treatment. Okay. Mm-hmm. And into my perception, there is bass traps, there's absorption. One of the subcategories is bass traps, and there's diffusion, right?
And reflection.
Okay, and reflection.
Aimed reflection.
I get it. So can you explain to people the difference between those categories?
Yeah, in acoustics, architectural acoustics, there are only three elements: aimed reflectors, diffusers, which don't need to be aimed, and absorbers, which don't need to be aimed. And then there's a subcategory of absorber, which is a low frequency absorber. They call a bass trap. Those are your three tools. That's all you get to paint with.
Can you tell them what a diffuser is? So
Okay.
A reflector obviously is like you were bouncing sunlight. It's like it bounces the
we'll
sound.
use light as an example. A reflector is a mirror. If you had a flashlight and you shined it in a mirror, you see the flashlight right back at you, the same as if you put the flashlight in your eye. Okay. A diffuser would be shining the flashlight at a white wall. You would still be able to read a piece of paper with the light off of the white wall, but you can't see the flashlight. And it doesn't hurt your eyes, so it's diffuse. And then an absorber would be shining the flashlight into like black felt fabric, like
Got it.
it's just gone,
So for instance, when you say the back wall, the first thing you would do even before listening would be to treat the back wall. Ideally, that would be diffusion, meaning sound goes from your speakers, bounces off sidewalls, and directly from the speakers goes to the back wall. But when it hits that back wall, it comes back to you diffused, ideally at different times, right? So
there's different ways to make diffusion. And if you want to get really technical, the bowed piece of wood, a lot of people use that as diffusion, but that's really called scattering. True diffusion would be sending it back to you out of phase, like you're talking. So those are those stair-stepped diffusers, like the QRD from RPG. As it hits each well, they're at different depths, so the sound comes back to you out of phase. And those phase shifts cause it to self-destruct and diffuse.
So your brain doesn't have an opinion about it. Your brain says, I'm ignoring that. Is that what it does?
It can't decipher it as the flashlight any longer. It doesn't know what it is. It's just air.
So it doesn't perceive it.
It's a nice air where if you absorbed it, the air is gone. But if you reflect it, you've got the exact music coming back at you identically as it came from the speakers.
So is it one of these things where your brain perceives it as not original signal, so it doesn't make you want to make decisions about the EQ of a high-end snare drum, right?
It's just room air.
It's ambience.
And yeah.
Okay, so ideally that's the way to go, yes?
It is.
But it's expensive for whatever reason. It doesn't seem like it should have to be. It's super expensive.
But you can use bent wood and just scatter, which gives you almost the same effect.
Okay, so tell us about what would a back wall of your control room. We're talking directly behind the rear of your head, people.
Watch this. Go back to those photos.
Okay,
on the back wall, you see the actual product, RPG, QRD diffusers, very expensive. Each one of those slats have a different depth inside them. But go to the next photo. See how there's bent wood on the ceiling?
Well, okay. You can actually see those diffusers a little better.
Yeah, you can see them through there, and you can see that the well depths are different. Put your cursor, right down. Well, you could do that. You'd have to go out of full screen to zoom.
There's a deep one. There's a shallow one.
A very shallow one to your right there, right above the black speaker. No, in the middle even.
Okay.
To the left. Go to the left. And then right there, very shallow one.
There?
Yeah, right there, very shallow. Yeah.
But you're talking about these clouds up here.
Yes. See how they're bent?
Yeah.
That provides diffusion, although it's not scientifically diffusion. It's called scattering. It sounds almost identical. And all you need to do is buy a piece of plywood and bend it. Real thin Luan plywood, and a lot of times you can get the Luan already veneered.
Like this right here.
Yeah.
What's the dimension? Is that like 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch? What's the thickness of that Luan? Yeah,
thick Luan. I think it's 1/4 inch.
Okay, so you put a
Yeah.
little bow. Is that bow?
It doesn't matter what thickness.
I'm just wondering how hard it would be to bend it.
Yeah, the thinner you get it, the easier it is to bow.
And does that radius matter, or is it just any radius will do it?
The tighter the radius, the thinner, the smaller the cylinder, the more severe the scattering.
Okay, so
but if you get too small, then you're not scattering the big frequencies, the lower.
So if you were to buy this and put it behind you as a listening position, how many pieces? Is it important that they're going the same way? Do they need to go different ways?
I tend to prefer 4-foot bent. And what makes that nice is that it comes in 4x8 and you can make columns out of it,
Okay, now would it be important when you say you bend the radius, you just eyeball it and you bend it so that it looks like a semi-cylinder, right? And
yes,
you put it on your wall. Do you need to put one bent left to right and one bent top to bottom? Does that matter? Or can it just be one?
It depends on if you want to scatter, floor to ceiling or scatter left to right.
What would you suggest behind a mixed position?
Look at the diffusers on the control room wall there. The ones down at the people scatter left to right. The ones above their head are scattering floor to ceiling.
Okay, so ideally,
because those diffusers up there are way above the people's heads. If it scattered left to right, you just wasted your money because it's scattering where no one's going to hear it. So we put the vertical ones up there, or they're horizontal, but they scatter vertically, so that it'll scatter down to the, mixed position.
So ideally, from hearing you, I would say, I'll buy a 4x8 sheet of this Luan, and I'll cut it in half, and I'll do one radius from left to right on the bottom, and I'll do one radius from top to bottom on the top, and hopefully I have, bent. It would be fit in a 7.5-7 foot room, but you probably have an 8 foot.
You know what? Look at the ceiling height in this place. If you're just in a bedroom, there's no point in trying to scatter down from the ceiling. You're not high enough on the wall. I would just make 4x8 columns because you don't have to cut them. Unless you like to cut wood, you can just buy them and bend them and put them on the wall.
And you can cut it right there at Home Depot. If you go in, they've got a little.
True, that's I know. Yeah,
they'll cut it for you. You bring it back. They have a machine. Then one of the dudes will cut it. So, what does a piece of Luan cost? Are we talking about $35, $20?
Yeah, and I've go ahead on these photos. Keep going. One more. Well, yeah, we did them on a ceiling. They put decals on them because they didn't like them to look just normal.
And you notice the radius on this it's not like a supercritical radius. It's just that it is a radius, right?
Right. I mean, the more you bend it, the more it scatters.
Right. Am I going somewhere?
Wait, yeah. Well, there. See those on the upper left and on the right? Those are all bent.
Mm-hmm.
And they're veneered. But he bought those at Home Depot already veneered.
Right.
They sell a product like that. So then he bent them.
So tell me, for instance, when you look at these RPG diffusers back here, what would this wall cost if you were to go out and buy these? They were talking tens of thousands of dollars, right?
No, about 8,000.
Okay.
Maybe 10. Yeah. But
okay. So 10 grand versus $30 to $40
$35 and bend some wood.
Yeah. This is what we're looking for. It's like, how do we make our bedrooms workable without having to buy RPG diffusers, right? Okay, so that's brilliant. Okay, so that's something anybody can do, and even if you're not that technical or that handy as a craftsman, you can get these. I'm gonna stop sharing so they can see us. You can get this stuff and do it in an afternoon. So let's say you haven't even listened yet. You got your monitors and you're set up in the most logical spot in the room. You've got this diffuser directly behind you. Now what do we do? That's it for part 1. Stay tuned. This Friday we'll be releasing episode 2 of this topic with the studio designer Gregg Vizza. Till then, we're signing off from the West Barn. See you next time.